Hello, everybody. My name is Ana Rezende, and in this podcast, I will share my transformational journey to become a health coach. In each episode, I will address a different subject that impacts our health, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Because I've learned that being healthy means being in balance. If you would like to make amazing discoveries, improve your health, get inspired, and yet find sustainable ways to live and help the planet, tune in. You are in the right place. I'm your host, Ana Rezende, and Good is What Makes You Feel Well is Mama Terra's podcast.
Toma banho de cachoeira, abraça uma pessoa amiga, corre na chuva, escala a montanha, contempla a vista, transcende, levita.
In today's episode, I am talking to AYLA Nova, a Yoga Nidra guide. AYLA began her training at an ashram in India, where she studied the practice and philosophy of Tantra Yoga, which later evolved into her connection with Yoga Nidra. Later on her journey, AYLA was diagnosed with leukemia. As usual, an immune suppression caused by the chemotherapy protocol led her to the ICU. After coming back from a coma and being told her state was terminal, AYLA started practicing Yoga Nidra multiple times a day, also known as NSDR, non-sleep deep rest. This practice gave her body a chance to rest deeply, restore, and finally heal. After being cancer-free, she felt called to share her experience with the world. So she created Yoga Nidra and Beyond, a space for well-being, mental fitness, and radical self-acceptance, where AYLA invites you to rest and dive deep into your own sleep yoga experience. Her YouTube channel has over 17,000 subscribers and more than 100 videos where she guides people on getting into a state of deep rest. In our conversation, AYLA shares her inspiring journey of overcoming cancer and how it's possible to strengthen our mental fitness through a state of being and not doing. She also tells us why resting makes her feel the best she's ever felt. Please welcome AYLA Nova. Good morning, AYLA. Welcome to Good is What Makes You Feel Well.
Aw, thank you for having me here.
To start our conversation, I would like to ask you what, in this moment of your life, makes you feel well?
What makes me feel well is rest. Rest makes me feel well. And rest has been a really huge part of my healing journey, and so it's what brings wellness into my world.
That is wonderful. And who doesn't need rest, right? And how has being well evolved for you?
Well, I feel as though once we leave our child self and come a little bit more closer to adulthood, there seems to be this emphasis on healing ourselves. And for me, my healing journey started quite young. I feel like I was brought into this awareness that I needed to understand the universe at a very early age. It didn't quite make sense to me. And so I ended up, following the wrong path, maybe not wrong, but the bumpier road of life. And eventually that led me to my yoga journey. And through practicing yoga, I found that the more restorative experiences of yoga were resonating with me the most. And after I'd had a bit of a traumatic experience in my early adulthood, I felt like restorative yoga was the only thing that really brought me peace. And so eventually my curiosity about where this peacefulness was coming from in the realm of, understanding the psyche, I ended up traveling to India and studying Tantra yoga at an ashram. And that was all about just healing the mind, healing the way that my thoughts were landing and passing. And then eventually I was working for an airline, and it was shift work, so you can't necessarily get the deep rest that you would if you were maybe working a regular job. And it was fun. I got to see a lot of the world, but eventually I got grounded with a diagnosis of a rare form of leukemia. So then my journey transformed from, understanding the way that the mind works to really sitting with my healing journey in the sense of existential crisis in a way, So that led me to Yoga Nidra, and I eventually found out that the Tantra lineage is where Yoga Nidra stemmed from. So things really came full circle for me. And I mean, that's a long-winded way to say that deep rest became the most healing part of my journey.
Wow. So you had been to India before.
Mm-hmm.
How magical.
Yeah, it was a special place. It's somewhere you go to discover peace and also exist within chaos. There's lots of sounds and a lot of action happening in that area. I was lucky. I ended up staying in a place just outside of, well, it was in Goa, but it was a bit of a quieter area. But as soon as you would leave the ashram, it was like honking horns and fast traffic and,
Millions
lots of
of
color.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've just interviewed another person that been to India and loved it and spent 60 days in an ashram and had the most transformative experience. So, yeah. So tell me more about India. So what led you to was just yoga?
Yeah, I didn't really know much about Tantra yoga, but one of my girlfriends here in Canada, she had mentioned that she wanted to go to this ashram, and we originally were supposed to go together and experience this yoga ashram. And then she wasn't able to make it for her own circumstance, and I ended up going by myself, which in the end felt like it was, I mean, these things always happen the way they're meant to. It truly felt like I needed to go for that deep dive into myself. And when we were at the yoga school, a lot of people associate tantra with, neo tantra, like more of a sexual or intimate practice. And there is a level of intimacy in it, but the intimacy is really just building a level of communication with your internal world so that you can show up more in the external world. So when I did end up learning about practice of yoga nidra, I saw those parallels without even realizing that it was a part of the same lineage, which was, feels kind of serendipitous to have these practices line up in that particular way.
Yeah, I love that. You started diving into yoga nidra on your way back. So how did it happen?
Well, I kind of jumped around with my yoga practice. I started off with, going to a hot studio, not really knowing much about it, and then ended up going to India to study as I was interested with the psychological part of the practice and the philosophy of yoga. And then when I came back to Canada, I actually really loved the more structured practice of Ashtanga. And so I was doing an Ashtanga teacher training, and that was when they had a special guest come in and offer a Yoga Nidra class and give us just a very basic understanding of the practice. And within one session, I had such a profound experience. It actually took me back to the felt sense that I had while I was in India. And so when I felt that connection, I immediately just felt so gravitated towards this practice and began seeking out places I could practice yoga nidra. And at the time, there just wasn't a lot of awareness around this practice where I lived. So it was very limited to where the offerings were. But then once I ended up entering into my cancer journey, I lost my mobility and wasn't able to do asana practices anymore. So yoga nidra, I knew that I was informed the type of cancer I had was known to go to the brain. And so I wanted to have as healthy of a mind as I could for as long as I could. And so I started practicing yoga nidra daily, multiple times.
That is so magical. So you look so young. So tell me, how old were you when you got the diagnosis?
I was diagnosed when I was 28, and that was, a little while ago. So it's been 6 years since I have been told that I am now cancer free and remission. And yeah, yoga nidra actually has really restorative properties for the body, in the sense that some some will in some of the texts it is supposed to be a very youthful practice. It maintains that youthfulness. So it might have something to do with that also.
Oh, absolutely. Because, yeah, you look so young. So we need to share this with the world. What else did you do besides yoga nidra for your healing?
Well, the beautiful thing about the practice of yoga nidra is it connects you to your intuition. And so the more connected you become to your intuition, the more you just follow the path that feels most intuitive, right? So you start to eat with that. Because yoga nidra works with the subconscious, it's like it all of a sudden starts shifting the programming that we've had within our mind, and also teaches us to just really, really dive more deeply into self-acceptance. And I think that as a byproduct of accepting yourself, it becomes a lot easier to choose options in life through the lens of love and that deep care for yourself and compassion for yourself. So naturally, what ends up happening is when I was able to get my mobility back, I started slowly walking 5 steps one day, and then 6 steps, and then eventually you can walk all the way down the hall. And then from that point, I ended up just continuing my yoga nidra practice. And during that time, took the teacher training to guide yoga nidra. And at the same time, simultaneously was told that the cancer had returned and it was terminal at that point. And so in my mind, I realized that there was no more fighting left to do, that I needed to make peace with my life. And so the things that helped me through that were literally facing fear. So I got a climbing membership to a gym and started climbing solo up the landscape, and then also just making my way to the West Coast and watching the sunset and the ocean, because I wanted to complete my experience of what I thought was near the end of my life with all of the things, the bucket list, right? And so what really helped me along that journey, to come back to what you were mentioning, is just intuitively and intentionally choosing what I wanted to put into my body, what kind of information I wanted to absorb. Because when we're in survival mode, it's all about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, these activations in the sympathetic nervous system. And, you know, I didn't want to go out a nervous wreck. And so I just allowed for myself to deeply rest in yoga nidra, eat food that felt nourishing, and, like I said, allow information that comes in to be thoughtful, mindful, and loving.
Oh my gosh. This is so beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, this is the message that we need out in the world. There is a way actually, there are multiple holistic ways that we can heal ourselves and stay young, right? And enjoy. That is so beautiful. So tell me about the work you do now.
Well, I am offering Yoga Nidra through podcast as well as on YouTube. And this is through Yoga Nidra and beyond. One of the biggest takeaways that I had from my cancer journey was, that previous in my life, I'd spent a lot of time, with that inner dialogue that was, maybe self-loathing, low vibrational, not nearly as kind as I am to myself today. But cancer felt like an opportunity to truly and radically accept myself, because I felt like I hadn't really done that previously. And so when that opportunity came up, it didn't feel like a curse. It honestly felt like a blessing. And I don't know if a lot of people could resonate with that, but I hope that they can, that these hardships that we go through are really opportunities to turn towards ourselves, not to run away from ourselves. And so I I really felt as though the message I want to share with the world through the practice of Yoga Nidra is to truly radically accept yourself and have compassion for yourself, because when often we create these relationships with other in such a loving and compassionate way, but when we turn it towards ourselves, it's not that same level of care. And when we can befriend ourselves deeply, then that can be extremely transformative. And in the practice of Yoga Nidra, you're lying down, and the practice is being still, to sit with the sensations, all of the senses that arise within you. And it's nice because in traditional meditations, often you're sitting in silence and you have to sit upright, or maybe there's some guidance with mindfulness practices as well. But in Yoga Nidra, it's so gentle in the sense that even if you were physically unable to sit in meditation, you can just lay down and you're guided through the whole experience. And from that, you can begin to create a sense of safety within yourself so that you can open up the doors and the windows to the experiences of your emotions. And in many cases, a lot of us have disregarded the emotions within ourselves because of the conditioning that we may have been shown through our early childhoods, or maybe even in past generations, these things get passed down onto us where we need to be tough or we can't cry or show any signs of vulnerability. But when you're practicing Yoga Nidra, you're being invited to experience those emotions and allow yourself to truly feel them, where they are in the body, how they express themselves, perhaps even memories that arise from the unconscious or even subconscious programming that we have. And it's really transformative because then it's easier to accept ourselves for those emotions when they come up. And that is, the driving force, is allowing others to experience their emotions. I feel as though emotional intelligence and awareness is a practice that we might not necessarily consider in a regular asana, but when you're lying in shavasana and corpse pose, it's pretty transformative.
Wow. Listening to you speak through that, what comes to my mind is that this should be a practice to take to hospitals, to schools, and to teach everybody and give them a chance to experience that as a form of treatment. So I have this vision that our future will be full of holistic practices. So it will be like retreat centers and not hospitals anymore, just with all those practices being offered. I think this has so much power to change the way our society believes health is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It is beautiful. Beautiful. I had the opportunity to see you in that virtual retreat, Awaken Be the Dead, in April. I could not participate in all of it, so I missed your workshop. But I wanted to talk to you because during the intro, I felt aligned. So tell me a little bit more of how the practice is.
Yeah, yoga nidra practice is quite passive, but the teachings are very inward and deep. Essentially, it's also been called NSDR. I don't know if you've heard of Andrew Huberman. He has a podcast, Huberman Labs, and he expressed to his listeners that he started using yoga nidra as a practice, but knew that it wasn't going to necessarily be approachable to everyone with the term yoga in it, because people automatically associate yoga with yoga asana, yoga postures, and movement.
Mhm.
But the practice of yoga nidra is actually stillness. So you lie in shavasana, which is corpse pose, lying down on your back with your arms and legs comfortably apart. And then it's mostly offered as something that's guided. So eventually, after you've done a yoga nidra training, you could guide yourself, but usually it's guided by another. And you go through these layers of being, and these in yoga philosophy are the koshas. We've got different layers. So we're moving through the physical, which is the body, as well as our connection to the world. And then we've got the energetic, which is, touching onto prana, the nadis, these energy systems that are moving within the body. And then from there, we are able to dive into Manamaya Kosha, which is the emotional body. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, where now that you've allowed your body to rest and you've observed different parts of yourself, then you connect into the breath, which is your energy, your life force. And from that space, it just automatically lets the nervous system know that you're here to rest and digest. And from that space, then we evoke the emotional body. And when we have that experience, we allow ourselves to feel into polarized experiences like high and low, or hot and cold, or joy and sadness, these opposing forces, and come back to a space of neutrality within them. Because as we know, you can't know how bright you can shine without knowing a sense of darkness within yourself. And when your eyes are closed and you're laying in corpse pose, I mean, nothing seems, a bit darker than that. So you really do have to go internal to experience that lightness. So through the emotional body, we find neutrality. And then from that space, there's this acceptance piece that really comes in when you're experiencing neutrality. And so then we open up into what is Vijnanamaya Kosha. And this is the more intuitive body. And now that we've connected to our body, our emotions, and our energy, then we can actually listen to the inner wisdom that is always flowing within us. But what happens through life is we get these blockages within our system that, don't allow us to connect to our body. There's a little bit of dissociation maybe, or, transcending, but not necessarily in the most embodied way. So then next, after we've connected to our intuition, we can rest with that openness of Anandamaya Kosha. And Ananda, translating as bliss, is the bliss body. And from that space, you can just be and rest as you are. And it's a really nice practice because it's helping people integrate, different therapies, different modalities. So let's say that you had an experience with Reiki, or if you had an experience expressing your life story to a therapist, you could come to a yoga nidra practice after those modalities or therapies and use it as a way to integrate the experience. So it's a really nice complementary form of self-awareness, of a therapeutic way to really integrate all of the teachings that you might be entering into on your healing journey.
Is there any parallel that we can make with meditation? Because I'm having a feeling that yoga nidra might be a very deep kind of guided meditation.
Mm-hmm. Well, yoga nidra is different in the sense that meditation and yoga nidra go into different brainwave states. And the other part of it is that when you're practicing meditation, there's this conscious awareness that you're resting in. But when you're practicing yoga nidra, you're going into this state that's right between wakefulness and sleeping. So it's a dreamlike state. And this is the hypnagogic state, this place where you're able to, absorb new information and start to rewire the brain, as well as get deep rest. So it's beautiful in the sense that you can fall asleep during the practice of yoga nidra and still receive physiological and even psychological shifts in a very positive way. So that's one of the things that's nice about it. If you do a meditation and you fall asleep, it doesn't feel like you've meditated. But if you are practicing yoga nidra and you fall asleep, it's still a part of the practice. Yoga nidra translates as sleep in Sanskrit. So this is, like I said, a really passive way to rest in self-awareness. And the thing that makes it really special too, opposed to, a meditation practice, is we use something in the tradition that I share. It's called a sankalpa. This is a heartfelt intention, and it's an I am declaration to self that has to resonate deeply for you. So, for instance, on my journey, when I had my cancer diagnosis, I was living and kind of functioning in that, survival mode. And eventually, when I was told about the terminal, once it had shifted to terminal, which obviously it didn't work out that way, thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
I realized that I really just needed to not fight myself anymore. I wasn't fighting cancer anymore. I was making peace with myself. And it was when I came out of a meditation and or not a meditation, sorry, yoga nidra practice, I had this intuitive realization, this epiphany, if I continued to imagine that I was dying, if I was living through through the lens that I'm dying, then I wasn't really living. And so I felt called to use the sankalpa, I am alive. And then from that space, it became my North Star. So before and after, at the beginning and at the end of a yoga nidra practice, you plant this sankalpa, and it helps you to reprogram the mind. So rather than living in survival mode, I started to shift back into rest and digest. And within that time frame, I ended up going back to the doctors, and it had resolved itself. So I do believe that a combination of changing my beliefs, as well as being honest and authentic with how I was feeling, and also, the energy that comes in when you really just accept where you're at. I can't say it was one particular thing that brought me into remission, but I definitely feel as though the modality of yoga nidra was a huge part of changing the inner dialogue, the belief system that I had at the time, and was a huge component of that transformation.
Wow. Wow. Thank God we have stories like yours to tell, because this is a story to inspire a lot of people that might be going through the journey similar to yours. Were you working when you got your diagnosis?
Yes, at the time I was a flight attendant, and it was actually the day that I got diagnosed was my first day of yoga therapy at the university. And so I ended up having to drop out of my university course, and I ended up going on leave, medical leave from my job. I was undergoing such intense treatment because it was acute leukemia, which means that it happens rapidly. You have a very limited time, limited window for the protocols to be put in place. And so I really just went from having, strange symptoms leading up to that experience to being placed in hospital and living out of a hospital for months. And so it was a pretty huge and radical shift in how my life looked. At one point had a daily yoga practice. I was traveling with the airline, and I had a really nice group of friends, and I felt like I had a really nice, healthy relationship. So it sort of spiraled in a way that it just didn't make sense that I was in that place. But it did open up this window to recognize all of the unresolved pains that I had. So cancer became this huge teacher and opened up the door to becoming really aware of what I hadn't let go. Because, when you have something as, a health crisis like this, it really does make you take a look at your mortality, And I had already been practicing Tantra, as I mentioned, and there was a very strong conversation that happened there where it didn't exclude any aspect of life, which also means witnessing and experiencing what comes with death, death of the ego, death of the body, death of the mind. There's all these different endings that happen in life. And so when I came to realize that, when it really showed up in my face, that was just another way to make peace with life, So forgiveness was a huge thing. And also just letting go. Letting go was a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a big thing that we need to learn, how to let go of the things that don't serve us anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy,
Mm.
right? It's not easy to recognize that something doesn't serve, and it's not easy to let go even after realizing it doesn't serve us anymore, right? Yeah, it's a journey.
There's this saying, lay it to rest. And I feel as though Yoga Nidra is a practice that allows you to really lay it to rest, to let it go. And letting go, I feel as though in some cases we might think in order to let it go, we have to forget about it. It can't exist anymore. But that doesn't really set us up, Letting go is allowing the power of what is coming up for you and what might seem as a negative or adverse way, and allowing that to not take power away from you. And power just being like, that life force energy. If it starts to dim that light within you, then it is taking. And so letting go is just the practice of letting it be. When you think about a loved one passing on, we have the ceremony to, commemorate their life. And I feel as though these experiences that we have, they also need some sort of, ceremony or ritual around them to be able to witness them and accept them and take what lesson needs to be drawn from that. And that is laying it to rest. I think seeing how it's allowed you to grow is what allows you to let it go. So yeah, the practice of Yoga Nidra is laying it to rest.
Wow, it's so beautiful. Beautiful. So, how, now that you found this big light and energy within you, how do you let it shine to the world?
Oh, you know, it's a great question. I feel as though if you allow yourself to truly and radically accept yourself, then the gift that you give the world is your authenticity. You know, if you can show up and you can say the things that you mean and you can express how you feel, that is a gift. And I feel, at least from the listeners I have of the practice that I share, a lot of the feedback I get is that they were able to, feel emotions, to feel these different parts of themselves, and how healing it has been to be able to sit with themselves, and there's, I my journey was with cancer, but I've got listeners that have experienced long COVID, that have, you know, um, body issues where it's, not allowed them, like chronic fatigue and burnout and all these different things that are essentially the nervous system just being overrun to the point that you can't show up the way that maybe you once did. And so this practice, from the feedback I've got, has really allowed people to restore their energy. And at least if their energy hasn't come back fully, accepting where they're at. And I just feel like that is so beautiful. I don't feel like I am giving that to people. I feel as though I just am guiding others to experience themselves. And not everybody has a safe space to experience themselves. And I feel as though this practice allows that. And so sharing this practice is the gift. Cancer for me was the gift to wake me up to this another layer of being, So yeah, that feels like the gift.
Yeah. And this is the big service. We are not teaching anything, we are not giving them anything, but we are showing them the possibilities that exist, alternatives that we have experienced that can serve them the same way it served us. A great, healthy, non invasive, holistic practices with no side effects whatsoever. That is what people have to try, not to go on those crazy clinical trials of new drugs. Try this first, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this message is really important. Tell me about your work now.
Well, currently you can access over 100 yoga nidras on any podcasting platform, as well as on YouTube, where I also have some videos too that people can watch. And I am taking a little bit of a break for the next little while, as I have just embarked on a research project to better understand how dysregulation in the nervous system is showing up for others. I'm limited to my own experience, and although it has been transformative and expansive for myself, I want to learn more about how others are experiencing that journey. So I'm speaking with people that are experiencing, chronic fatigue and different types of autoimmune disorders, and I'll be doing that over the next couple of months and developing a Yoga Nidra program that people can, learn more about Yoga Nidra, learn more about the philosophy of yogic living, and really embody the practice. There's so much information out in the world that you can learn from, but integrating that into your daily life and living out of that space is another thing. So my mission right now is to develop this program that I have that has worked for myself and also some others that I'd worked with one-on-one. But yeah, that'll be coming out within the year. So that's my current working situation.
I am a yogi myself. Now I'm super into knowing more about yoga nidra and see how I can benefit from it, because this is something that I can help so many people and in so many different levels, right?
Yeah.
Yay. Wow, that's so wonderful. So if people want to connect with you and check your YouTube channel, your videos and whatnot, how they can do that?
Absolutely. You can go to aylanova.com and it will link you to whichever platform resonates with you. You can find me on Instagram at aylanova nidra, and Nidra is Nidra, not exactly how it sounds. And yeah, those are the platforms you can find me on. Yeah, the Apple Podcasts, there's Spotify, and
So what's the name of the podcast again?
Yoga Nidra and Beyond.
Okay, Yoga Nidra and Beyond. So we'll have all that in the show notes. So to make it really easy for people to find you and to follow you. Okay, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. I feel honored to have you here.
It truly is an honor to be here and to share this practice with you. So thank you as well.
Yeah, so take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening. It means a lot to me that you chose to be here. To help Mama Terra's mission of making the world a disease-free place for generations to come, you can follow the show, write a review, or talk to your friends about it. You can also subscribe to my newsletter. Every week, I craft good health and wellness tips, recipes, and book recommendations with love and care, just for you. My intention is to give you information and resources to help you make good choices and feel well. Find the link to subscribe in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you again for being here. We have lots of new episodes coming up, so stay tuned. And remember, good is what makes you feel well.
Transcende, levita, toma banho de cachoeira, abraça uma pessoa